The day I became the most hated man in Lakeside Estates was also the day I took back control. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. It started with a $500 fine for something as simple, as human, as fishing with my grieving daughter. They thought I'd quietly pay and disappear. What they didn't know was that I had $4 million and a bone-deep resolve forged by loss. If you're watching this while hiding from your own HOA nightmare, drop a comment. Let me know where you are. Because this story, it's about what happens when grief meets power and refuses to back down. My name is Remy Thornfra. A few months ago, I had what most would call the American dream: success in venture capital, early retirement at 42, a loving wife, and a bright daughter. But life doesn't keep things balanced for long. My wife, Rachel, lost her battle with cancer last year, and the grief that followed left both me and our daughter, Selene, struggling to breathe. The only thing that helped was fishing, the last peaceful memory we shared as a family. It became our quiet ritual, a thread connecting us to what we'd lost. That's why I moved us to Lakeside Estates, for a fresh start near the water, a chance to heal. The community looked perfect, until we met Karen Wellington, the HOA president with a clipboard, a power complex, and no patience for compassion. Our first real day of peace was shattered by a $500 fine for fishing. And that's when I realized, some rules aren't made to be followed. Some are made to be broken. It was the kind of morning that felt borrowed from a better life. The sky was clear. The lake, still as glass, mirrored the soft blue above. Selene was crouched at the edge of the dock, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back in a messy braid her mom used to do for her. She had just reeled in her second fish, a feisty little bluegill, and was working to gently unhook it with those careful fingers that once made friendship bracelets for Rachel during chemo. I watched her, quietly, like I might scare the moment away if I breathed too loud. And then, without warning, the air changed. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" The voice wasn't just sharp, it was surgical, measured, cold. The kind of voice that didn't ask, it commanded. I turned, already knowing this was the part of the day that would break. She was striding toward us from the walking path, a woman in her late 50s, wrapped in expensive athleisure-like armor, sunglasses pushed up into a perfectly highlighted helmet of blonde. Her face was a masterclass in contempt. If I had been spray-painting profanities on her Lexus, I doubt she'd have looked angrier. She didn't see a father and daughter healing. She saw a violation. I stood slowly, one hand instinctively placed between her and my daughter. "Morning," I said. "Just fishing with my daughter." I offered a hand. "Remy Thornfra. We moved into the Sycamore Drive house last month." She didn't even glance at my hand. Instead, she began tapping on a tablet, her fingers moving with a kind of officious glee. "Mr. Thornfra," she said, lips barely moving. "Fishing is strictly prohibited in the community lake. This is a violation of Lakeside Estates HOA regulations, amended last month. The fine is $500. You'll receive formal notice today." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" Selene froze beside me, eyes wide, her hands still damp from the fish. I could feel her shrinking. The joy in her face drained like water through a crack. "I was told fishing was one of the community's amenities," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. She smiled, a thin, humorless line. "Well, the amendment passed 4 weeks ago. All residents were notified by email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them." She turned the tablet toward me, flashing a screen with HOA letterhead and a long block of legalese. The date, 4 weeks prior. I hadn't received anything. "I didn't get that email," I said, still trying to keep this civil. Her response was instant. "Perhaps you should check your spam folder, though we can't be responsible for residents who don't stay informed." Then her eyes drifted down to our tackle box with a sniff. "And not everyone wants to see this sort of mess while enjoying their lake view with coffee." There it was. Not concern, not rules, contempt. I felt something knot in my chest. Celine looked like she was about to cry. "We'll pack up," I said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Just send me the fine details and updated rules." Her smile returned, this time almost triumphant. "Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other." She turned and walked away, her pristine sneakers making no sound on the grass. I didn't move. Not right away. I watched her leave, and for the first time since Rachel's funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. It was fury. That afternoon, after we got home, I told Celine to grab some lunch and take it easy. She nodded silently, eyes downcast, and disappeared into her room with her earbuds in. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at that still lake, the one that was supposed to be our place of peace. And all I could see now was the faint outline of Karen Wellington standing there, finger wagging, smile sharp as a blade. I sat down with my laptop. First stop, email, inbox, promotions, spam, every folder I could think of. Nothing. No update, no amendment, no HOA notice about new fishing restrictions. I found older welcome emails, neighborhood newsletters, even a seasonal yard decorating guide. Nothing mentioning a ban. It wasn't there. I checked Celine's inbox just in case they had somehow cross-listed the accounts. Same result. Karen had lied. Or, if she hadn't lied, then someone had buried the truth on purpose. That was when the itch started. I've spent most of my life in finance, and one thing I've learned is this. When people push rules harder than necessary, it's never about the rule. It's about leverage, about control. And the HOA was starting to smell like a boardroom filled with bad debt and good cover stories. So I started digging. First, I searched Lakeside Estates HOA fishing ban. Nothing. No public meeting minutes, no vote results. Odd. Usually, amendments like this require homeowner input, or at the very least, some record of transparency. Then I searched the president herself, Karen Wellington. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became. She wasn't just some power-hungry neighborhood watchdog with a tablet and a superiority complex. She was a player, owner of a boutique real estate firm specializing in luxury property management. Multiple properties held in trust, social media full of wine-tasting events and lakefront gatherings. At that same lake she fined me for touching. One photo in particular stood out. Karen, drink in hand, standing on a dock, flanked by HOA board members, a small crowd laughing behind them. Same lake, same regulations? Clearly not. But that wasn't what made me sit up straight. What made me stare hard at the screen was a buried HOA clause I found in an old PDF. The lake wasn't even fully owned by the HOA. It was leased. A 30-year recreational use agreement from the original developer, Meridian Development Corporation. Not only that, the lease had an expiration date less than 2 months away. And in the fine print, the clause stated that unless the agreement was renewed, all control reverted back to the title holder. Which meant the HOA didn't truly own the lake. They were just renting access. So why the sudden fishing ban? Why the fine? Why the show of force? That's when I remembered the look on Karen's face. Not just annoyance, control, and something else. Fear. This wasn't about fish. This was about keeping people away, about laying the groundwork for something bigger. So I did what any good investor does when something doesn't add up. I picked up the phone, called the county clerk's office, and requested the public title information for the lake property. And I called Merrick, my neighbor 3 doors down, a retired attorney. I had a feeling he'd seen this kind of power play before. Merrick Henderson met me on his front porch with a coffee mug in one hand and a knowing look in his eyes. "Let me guess," he said before I could even open my mouth. "Karen fined you for breathing wrong near the lake." I gave him a weak smile. "Fishing, actually, with my daughter." He let out a short, humorless chuckle and motioned for me to follow him inside. "That woman's been running this place like her own private fiefdom for years. Come on, you need to see something." Merrick's home was what you'd expect from a retired ethics attorney. Neat, lined with bookshelves, framed degrees on one wall, faded courtroom sketches on another. He led me into a small study that looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. On his desk sat a thick folder labeled Lakeside HOA, Enforcement Patterns. "Started this about 6 years ago," he said, flipping it open. "After she cited me for having a bird feeder too close to my fence. Same feeder I'd had for a decade. Something didn't sit right. Inside were printouts of violation notices, resident complaints, even screenshots of social media posts. But what caught my eye was a spreadsheet Merrick had built. Rows and rows of HOA enforcement actions categorized by name, address, race, tenure, and property value trends. The pattern was undeniable. New residents, especially minorities and single parents, were fined at nearly 3 times the rate of longtime homeowners. Many of those fines were for vague or selectively enforced rules: lawn color inconsistency, unauthorized holiday lights, mailbox placement. Merrick pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. "Now here's where it gets interesting," he said. "Almost every time one of these homeowners sold under pressure, the property ended up purchased by shell companies tied to Karen's real estate firm." He handed me another folder, this one labeled Wellington Holdings, Acquisitions. 6 properties in 5 years, Merrick said. Same playbook every time. Pressure with fines, tank the sale value, swoop in through a proxy buyer, flip the house 6 months later. And now, she was after the lake. "She's been in quiet talks with Meridian Development," Merrick explained. "Their lease on the lake is about to expire. Word is they're in financial trouble. She's trying to buy it, personally, not for the HOA. That stopped me cold. "You're saying she wants to own the lake herself?" "Not wants to. Plans to," a voice said from the doorway. I turned to see an elegant man in his 60s step into the room. Tall, composed, with the kind of posture that hinted at long years in boardrooms. "Samuel Washington," he said, shaking my hand. "I ran Lakeside National Bank for 18 years, retired early, but I still keep tabs on certain things." Samuel opened his leather-bound notebook and began flipping through pages. "Karen's trying to rezone the lakefront. If she pulls it off, she can cut off access, build 5 or 6 luxury homes, and make a killing." I sat back, feeling the weight of it settle on my shoulders. "She's using the HOA not to serve the community," Samuel said quietly, "but to clear the board." Merrick leaned in. "We've got records. We've got data. What we don't have is someone willing to take her on." I looked at both of them, then out the window, past the hedges, down the street, toward the lake that used to mean peace for my daughter and me. I nodded. "Then I guess you do now." "In my old life, I made a career out of spotting companies on the brink, businesses too proud to admit they were drowning, but desperate enough to take a lifeline when it was thrown. You don't spend 15 years in venture capital without learning how to smell panic hidden beneath. That's the on paper. They looked stable. A regional developer with a decent portfolio and a history of residential and commercial projects across the state. The biggest? A failed mixed-use commercial build in a neighboring city. Their anchor tenant pulled out mid-pandemic, and with it went the financing that supported half the project. Meridian scrambled, securing bridge loans and restructuring their existing credit lines. But those kinds of financial gymnastics only work for so long. I contacted an old colleague from my fund management days, someone now working in private equity who'd reviewed Meridian for a possible acquisition the year prior. His report confirmed what I suspected. Meridian was over-leveraged, their portfolio stretched thin, and they were actively looking to liquidate non-core assets. The lake wasn't just available, it was expendable. I checked property filings. The lake lot, along with the 10-foot shoreline buffer, had been quietly reclassified as a non-revenue-generating legacy holding. Translation: deadweight. The recreational lease with the HOA was set to expire in under 2 months, and unless it was renewed, the land would revert to its raw state, undeveloped and unencumbered. To most, that meant nothing. To me, it meant leverage. I began mapping possible outcomes. If Meridian defaulted, the land could fall into receivership. If they sold it to Karen, she could develop high-end lakefront homes, assuming she could secure rezoning, environmental clearance, and financing, all of which were far from certain given her fragile real estate operation. But there was another possibility. Meridian, under pressure, might not wait for a drawn-out approval process or payment plan. They might take a cleaner exit, even at a slight discount, if it meant fast cash and no legal entanglements. And that was the angle I watched. Not to outbid Karen on price, but to outmaneuver her on timing, structure, and execution. I didn't need to compete in her game. I just needed to show Meridian I was everything she wasn't. Fast, liquid, and quietly capable of closing a deal without noise. So while Karen polished her pitch decks and lobbied the city, I read balance sheets. And I waited, for the moment she blinked. Timing, in both business and war, is everything. I'd confirmed that Meridian was in a tight spot, and Karen had just enough rope to hang herself. She was mid-negotiation, still scrambling for financing, still projecting confidence while juggling creditors and zoning paperwork she hadn't even finished. But she had no idea that her exclusive window was far more fragile than she believed. What Meridian needed wasn't a higher bid. They needed certainty. So I picked up the phone. No lawyers, no middlemen. Just a call to Tom Branson, the Meridian exec handling property divestitures. I told him who I was, what I was offering, and most importantly, how quickly I could deliver. $350,000, no contingencies, full payment within 7 business days. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not long, but long enough for me to know I had his attention. "I'll take it to the board," he said, his tone already shifting. "You'll hear from us by end of day." He called back in 3 hours. They were in. No back and forth. No drawn-out due diligence. The property had already been surveyed, the environmental reports were clean, and Meridian was bleeding cash. They just needed to offload, and I gave them the fastest way out. The only thing left was to sign. The moment the paperwork hit my inbox, I sat still for a full minute. Not from hesitation, but gravity. This wasn't just a land deal. This was the very ground Karen believed she was about to rule. And in one stroke, without a single public fight, I now owned every inch of it. Every dock, every shoreline, every ripple of water. I closed the file, picked up my phone, and texted one word to Merrick and Samuel. Done. No fanfare. No announcement. The world didn't shift on its axis. But something fundamental had changed. Karen was planning a coronation. She just didn't know the throne had been sold out from under her. And the best part? She was going to walk straight into her own undoing, flanked by architects, board members, and renderings of her grand vision, completely unaware that the future she was pitching to the community didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to me. In this kind of game, visibility is a liability. I didn't need Karen to know I was making moves, not yet. If she even suspected I was involved, she'd find a way to stall the sale, smear my name, or worse, rally the HOA board to sabotage it from within. So I did what any seasoned investor would do when working under the radar. I disappeared, on paper. Thorncroft Holdings LLC was born in a state with discrete filing requirements, registered under a legal proxy with no obvious ties to me. No emails, no home address, just a business entity with capital, clean credit, and a short history. Just enough to be legitimate. Just vague enough to be untraceable. To Meridian, I was just another real estate investor. To Karen, I was invisible. Only Merrick and Samuel knew. Even within our growing resident group chat, I kept things vague. We shared data, patterns, and frustrations, but not this. This part was mine to carry, because if this move failed, I didn't want the backlash touching anyone else. Especially not Celine. While Karen ramped up her charm campaign, PowerPoint presentations, glossy future vision boards, whispers of luxury lakefront amenities, I said nothing. I watched, waited. I let her draw the spotlight and soak in the applause. She was so confident, so sure that the lake was hers, that the community would soon fund her vision with special assessments and HOA-backed loans. She strutted through HOA meetings like a queen unveiling her crown. And I sat in the back row, taking notes. She had no idea her entire plan was built on land she no longer controlled. Every day that passed without suspicion was a win. Every rumor she spread about problematic residents and declining property values just made her more careless. She even started dropping my name, warning board members that I was financially unstable and not aligned with community standards. It was perfect. The more she talked, the deeper she dug. All I had to do was wait. Because the moment of impact had to be public, visible, undeniable. And not just for her, but for every resident she'd bullied, fined, intimidated, or humiliated. And I knew exactly when it would come. Karen had announced a lakeside celebration, an exclusive event to unveil her redevelopment plan. A catered party, speeches, music, and a full reveal of the new lakeside experience. That was the moment. The stage she built would become the place she fell. It was almost theatrical the way she staged it all. Banners with the HOA logo flanked the lakeside gazebo. Tables were dressed in white linen. Hors d'oeuvres passed on silver trays. A Bluetooth speaker played something orchestral, too dramatic for the occasion but fitting for the ego hosting it. Karen stood at the center of it all, dressed in pale lavender, clutching a microphone like it was a scepter. Her voice floated across the lawn. This is the beginning of a new era for Lakeside Estates. I stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed at first. No announcement, no grand entrance. Just one more neighbor blending in with the families sipping wine and nodding along. I watched her flip through a slideshow of digital renderings, modernized walking paths, a members-only lakeside lounge, landscaped terraces. There was no mention of the fishing dock, no mention of access for kids or families, or healing. Only value enhancement and exclusive enjoyment zones. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the lake. It was about erasing everything the lake had meant to people like me. Karen didn't see a grieving father or a daughter rebuilding piece by piece. She saw liabilities. She saw us as clutter, noise, and now she was trying to turn that silence into square footage. But even as she spoke of unity and vision, there was a current beneath her words. Urgency, desperation, the kind that bleeds through rehearsed lines when you know you're racing a clock you can't control. She was behind schedule. She thought this party would be her pivot point, her way of rallying support before Meridian finalized the deal. She had no idea that deal was already gone. I could see it in her eyes when she locked glances with me across the lawn. Just a flicker, but it was there. Recognition, doubt, fear. She knew I wasn't there to mingle. And in that moment, standing in the very space she believed she was conquering, I realized something. She was no longer speaking to the community. She was trying to convince herself. So I waited. Let her finish her speech. Let the applause rise. Polite, but thin. Let her believe, for one last breath, that she still had the upper hand. Because what was coming next would pull the entire platform out from under her. And when the truth hit, it wouldn't just be loud. It would echo. I stepped forward as Karen concluded her speech, her voice still echoing over the lawn. Something about legacy, community pride, shared stewardship. Actually, I said, picking up the second microphone from the nearby speaker stand, there seems to be a small detail we've overlooked. The music cut. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward me. A few recognized me as the quiet guy from Sycamore Drive. Most didn't. But Karen did. Her smile froze mid-expression, like a mask mid-slip. "This is a private event, Mr. Thornfra," she said tightly, gripping her mic a little too hard. I nodded politely. "That's exactly what I'm here to address." I reached into my folder and held up a copy of the signed deed, printed large, on legal stock, the county seal clearly visible in the sunlight. The HOA's projector dimmed behind me. All eyes shifted to the document in my hand. "I'm here today not as a guest," I said clearly, "but as the legal owner of this lake and the surrounding 10-foot shoreline, which includes the very ground most of you are standing on." There was a beat, just one, but it was deep, like a pressure drop in the air. Mouths didn't drop, they tightened. Karen's face, however, shifted in stages. Confusion, disbelief, then panic so quickly masked it almost passed as indignation. "That's absurd," she snapped. "The lake belongs to the HOA. Everyone knows that." "Incorrect," I said, my tone calm. "It belonged to Meridian Development. As of 72 hours ago, it now belongs to Thorncroft Holdings, my company." I gestured behind me. My attorney stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Beside him, Officer Reynolds. Quiet, composed, in uniform. For legal clarity, I continued, the recreational lease agreement you've cited is set to expire in 28 days. But due to repeated breaches of maintenance obligations under that agreement, I've already filed for early termination. Effective immediately. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not outrage, not yet. Just confusion. Uncertainty. Then came my final words. I respectfully ask that you gather your belongings and vacate the premises. You have 15 minutes. The silence that followed wasn't explosive. It was clinical. As if everyone suddenly realized they were standing in a place that no longer belonged to them, emotionally or legally. Karen opened her mouth to speak again, but this time, no words came. And in that moment, the real collapse had already begun. Not loud, just irreversible. For a moment, Karen stood there, frozen beneath the HOA banner she had so proudly unfurled just minutes earlier. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The paper-thin composure she wore so carefully had torn clean down the middle. Then the murmurs began. Not loud, not angry, just sharp, precise, disbelieving. She doesn't own the lake? She lied? I thought this was approved already, wasn't it? Like dominoes, the illusion unraveled. Board members who once stood proudly behind her quietly stepped away. Neighbors who had clapped moments earlier now folded their arms, casting side glances not at me, but at her. At the woman who had made herself the face of the community, and, in doing so, had exposed herself to its judgment. Karen's voice finally returned, but it came out brittle, breaking at the edges. This isn't over, she said, almost to herself. We have legal... You had leverage, I replied evenly. Now you have questions to answer. And the community had them too. By the time I stepped down from the platform, half the guests had already begun packing up, not in protest, but in quiet reckoning. Some stopped to look at the deed still in my hand. Others simply shook their heads and walked away. The wine glasses sat untouched on linen-draped tables, suddenly awkward reminders of a celebration that never belonged to them. Karen didn't fall apart all at once. She cracked. In front of the people she once ruled with a clipboard and a smirk. And as the crowd dispersed, not with chaos but with clarity, one truth settled into the soil around Rachel's lake. The mask was off, and no one would ever look at her the same way again. Karen didn't implode in one day. It started with whispers, subtle at first, like loose threads in a sweater no one dared tug. But after that afternoon at the lake, when I held up the deed and told them the truth, people started talking, quietly, consistently, and this time, they didn't look away. The very next HOA meeting was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. Some neighbors who had never attended before came just to listen, to watch. The room wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. Karen arrived late and sat rigidly, clutching her binder like a shield. But the air had shifted. The control she once wielded with her voice and glare had been replaced by questions, doubts. And then, someone finally stood up. It was Sapphira Duskland, a florist, soft-spoken, not one for confrontation. But that night, she spoke. Her voice trembled at first, but her words were steady. I've been on this board for 3 years, she said. And I've seen violations waived for some and enforced harshly on others. I've seen resources funneled into pet projects that only benefit a select few homes, always the same ones. And I've stayed quiet because I thought, maybe it was just how things worked. She paused, then added, but I don't think this is how things should work. That broke the dam. Others began sharing stories, some familiar to me from our private meetings, some I was hearing for the first time. Citations for mailbox paint that didn't match a shade no one could find in writing. Pool bans for kids who weren't calm enough. Late-night inspections with no written record. Within a week, the board voted to initiate an audit of HOA finances. What they found was damning. Funds earmarked for shared spaces had been redirected to consulting fees tied to shell companies, several of which traced back to entities connected to Karen's real estate business. Landscaping contracts had been awarded without bidding, Properties cited repeatedly for violations had quietly changed hands at below market value, then resold under different LLCs for profit. The board moved swiftly. Karen was suspended, then removed entirely. Her access to community records revoked. Her name scrubbed from the official HOA website. But the fallout didn't stop there. With the audit results now public, local press got wind of the story. And once Karen's history of selective enforcement and personal gain made headlines, her real estate business began to collapse. Clients pulled listings, partners distanced themselves. And those LLCs she'd used to flip homes? They were now under review by the state attorney's office for fraudulent misrepresentation. I didn't rejoice. I watched. Quietly, carefully, until one day, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The same pristine lawn she'd once fined others for not edging properly. No open house, no tours, just silence. And when the moving truck finally pulled away, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance restored. After everything that happened, the meetings, the lies, the legal filings, the humiliation, there was still one thing left undone. Justice had been served. Karen was gone. The HOA was no longer her weapon, but the lake? That lake wasn't just a battlefield, it was a memory, a place where pain and peace had touched the same shoreline, and I never wanted it to become another trophy. So I made a decision. I called Merrick and Samuel to my home one evening. We sat around the dining table, no strategy, no documents, just coffee and quiet. And I told them what I planned to do. I never bought the lake to keep it, I said. I bought it to protect it. They didn't need me to explain. They understood. The next week, I began the paperwork to transfer ownership of the lake to a newly formed community trust, one that would operate independently of the HOA, with a charter requiring full transparency, open access, and ecological stewardship. No board politics, no hidden leases, just water, land, and people. But before I signed the deed over, I made one final change. I renamed it Rachel's Lake, not for drama, not for legacy, but because that place had once been a moment of peace for a woman I loved deeply, and for the daughter who still carried her smile. It felt right. When the announcement went out, first through our resident newsletter, then the local news, something shifted in the community. The emails I received weren't just thank yous, they were stories. My son caught his first fish there. My dad used to sit by the dock just to listen to the wind. I took my engagement photos on that shoreline. Turns out, the lake had always belonged to the people who cherished it. I just helped bring that truth back into the open. And now, it had a name worthy of what it meant. Rachel never got to see what came after her fight, but I think she would have smiled at the sight of Selin organizing community cleanup days, teaching kids how to untangle fishing line and test water quality. At families bringing picnic blankets again, without fear of fines or stares. At the simple fact that peace had. 1 year after I signed the purchase contract, we called it Community Fishing Day at Rachel's Lake. No banners, no sponsors, no need for spectacle. Just a heartfelt invitation posted in the neighborhood chat, pinned to the community board, and taped to a few front gates. This Saturday, bring your fishing rod, bring your family. Rachel's Lake is waiting for you, like any place of peace always waits for someone to return. Celine and I arrived early. The morning mist still clung to the grass, and the lake's surface was as smooth as glass. She set up a small wooden table, placed a tray of cookies, some orange juice, and a chalkboard sign she wrote herself. Catch and release, but keep the smile. People began to arrive slowly. No fanfare, no awkwardness, just families who had once hesitated to step outside because of a fine, children who'd once been banned from the water, parents who had only dared to look at the lake from a distance. Today, they were all here. Some lounged on blankets with books, others taught their daughters how to bait a hook. There was laughter when lines tangled in the grass, shared stories between neighbors who hadn't spoken in years. An older couple told me they had nearly moved away because of the suffocating atmosphere. Now, they said, it finally feels like we're part of a real community. At one point, Selin pulled me toward the shore where a small boy was struggling with his fishing rod. She knelt beside him, gently helping him fix the hook, and said, Fishing isn't about winning. It's about learning to be patient. I stood quietly, watching her. The breeze rustled through the trees. The sunlight danced across the water. No one mentioned Karen. No one needed to. The simple presence of everyone here, natural, unforced, was proof enough that true authority doesn't come from a title or a chair. It comes from trust, freely given by the people around you. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the lake, I heard the laughter of children echo off the water. Adults chatted easily nearby. No violation slips, no tablets, no one in charge, just people, with people. And a lake named after a woman who once dreamed of afternoons just like this. That evening, after everyone had packed up and the last ripple on the lake had stilled, Céline and I stayed behind. We sat side by side on the old dock, our legs swinging just above the water, the wooden planks warm beneath us from the day's sun. The air was quiet now. No laughter, no reels spinning, no clinking cups, just the chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of leaves, and the faint shimmer of moonlight brushing the lake's surface. Céline leaned her head gently against my shoulder. "That was a good day," she said softly. I nodded, not wanting to disturb the calm. "Yeah, it really was." We sat in silence for a while, letting the stillness do the talking. The same dock where we once sat in grief now held something entirely different. Not happiness, exactly, but peace. A kind of peace we hadn't known in a long time. "She would have loved this," Céline whispered. I didn't need to ask who she meant. Rachel had always loved quiet moments like this. No expectations, no noise, just water, sky, and the people she loved close by. I imagined her watching from wherever she might be, smiling at how full the lake had become. Not with fish, but with people, with laughter, with healing. "She'd be proud of you, Dad," Céline added, her voice almost a breath. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I think she'd be proud of both of us." The stars began to appear, one by one, reflected perfectly on the glassy surface of the lake that now bore her name. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. We just stayed there, two silhouettes on the water, letting the night wrap around us gently. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence didn't hurt. It held us. Karen left quietly, not with lawsuits or press conferences, but with a moving van and a reputation in ashes. Her house sat on the market for months, untouched. No one wanted the home of a woman whose name had become synonymous with manipulation. She vanished from the community she once ruled, leaving behind nothing but resentment and silence. People asked me what I would do next. The mayor announced he wouldn't be seeking re-election, and rumors began swirling that I should run. "You've already done more for this neighborhood than any politician ever has," someone told me. I was flattered, but I knew my answer. I wasn't interested in podiums or politics. Instead, I did something Rachel would have done. I took a portion of the money I had set aside for investments and founded a scholarship fund. The Rachel Thornfrom Memorial Fund, created for children who had lost a parent to cancer. Not a huge fund, not flashy, but real, personal, built from the same quiet strength she carried with her every day. It wasn't about charity. It was about honoring the woman who had given me everything, and making sure her spirit lived on in the lives of children who needed hope just like Céline once did. Because in the end, it wasn't about the lake, or the board, or the fines. It was about restoring something far more fragile, dignity. And if you're watching this while struggling with your own HOA nightmare or neighborhood tyrant, let me leave you with this. Sometimes the best way to defeat a bully isn't to become a bigger bully. It's to change the rules of the game entirely. And when you do, don't just win. Heal. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Have you ever stood up to a system stacked against you? What's the Rachel's Lake in your life? Something worth fighting for, not with anger, but with purpose. And hey, if you're watching this from a folding chair by a quiet lake, rod in hand, I hope the water's calm, the sky is clear, and that you catch something worth keeping, even if it's just peace.